there's a value right now for those of us who have the privilege of being able to engage in these processes because we're able to. And let's not waste these circumstances. Let's not just throw this time away. It's a time in which we can practice. It's a time in which we can take in some ideas. It's a time in which we can hear some things that can change us and begin to change the culture and change the world around us, if enough of us do it.
In the last few days, we've been talking about awakening in relation to a number of different areas of life, and especially in your own journey of awakening, in relation to art, but also very importantly, ethics and how to behave in the world. You've mentioned that you've had a kind of a Buddhist background in training, but also that's not your main interest, that your life and your working life has been much more involved with the mindfulness world over the last maybe couple of decades. I'm interested in, is there anything more to say about where the mindfulness movement is, and in a way where it could go?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, no, I think the mindfulness world has been incredibly valuable for humanity in the last wee while, since really the mid-1970s, when Jon Kabat-Zinn first began to popularize mindfulness methods, starting with people who were suffering from chronic pain and stress. And the initial beginnings of that work, of bringing mindfulness out of the monasteries, as it were, and Buddhist centers, and into the mainstream of society, came via a medical route. So helping people deal with initially chronic pain and stress, and then depression and other psychological conditions with mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So you had mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and then a whole flowering of different approaches. Many of them centered on some kind of 2-month-long training. And I was astonished when I engaged with this to discover how much change people could go through in 2 months if they undertook the practices. I was delighted by that and enthused by it and really, really wholeheartedly engaged by it. And I've been working in that field for a long time now, as you say, particularly focused on leadership, but also in other areas of life. Now, I think it's now time for mindfulness to go further. Because there is a great deal more on offer. When it was originally taught as a way of working with the mind, what we now call mindfulness has a very clear historical root back into an ancient tradition. In that tradition, it was taught as a gateway to awakening. That was the intent behind the early teachers. They were interested in awakening. They weren't interested in helping people to deal with their stress somewhat better or manage their chronic pain. Valuable though those things are. They really are. I don't want to downplay them. People who come to manage their minds differently derive enormous benefit. But there is very, very much more on offer. Very much more on offer. And the much more that's on offer is not for everyone. Not everybody will be interested in the much more that's on offer. But there's an opening. And some people will want to engage with that. And there's a conversation now going on. I'm not alone in this. There are many different people right now versed in psychology, neuroscience, other methodologies, who are beginning to speak much more widely, publicly, about the relationship between their understandings in terms of psychology, neuroscience, and so on, and the possibilities of awakening, in whatever way they frame it for themselves. Of course, probably Sam Harris has had the most influence in this space to date. and it's been really, really valuable. But many people, from very erudite researchers down to people with, perhaps a Buddhist or a Hindu background in meditation, and then going on to speak this more contemporary language. So that's really beginning to take place, and that's a conversation that I'm interested in participating in and in taking forward in whatever way I can, based on my understanding, my experience. So this, series of recordings really is all about, for me, saying, yeah, this is really valuable. People can benefit here. There's some possibilities here. Let's go forward. I must also add John Teasdale. John has written a very, very good book taking this forward. And by the way, Mark Williams' book, Deeper Mindfulness, I think is another really, really valuable contribution to taking this further. So there are all sorts of strains going on in contemporary culture, bringing mindfulness into the wider world. My own take is very much focused on issues such as the experience of awe and wonder from engaging with the naturalistic imagination that we discussed previously, or engaging with art, or engaging in contemplation and reflection. And of course, the cultivation of an ethical orientation and kindness, focus, and all the stuff that you get from mindfulness and loving kindness meditation and so on.
I'd like to ask you a bit more about some of the contemplative, the area of contemplation and reflection. But before I do that, so if I'm understanding right, you're making a link between where mindfulness is now as a cultural phenomenon, as a practice phenomenon. It's kind of accepted in the world in a fairly broad way. Not universal, but broad.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you're talking about it getting taken deeper and further. And what's the relationship between where it is and where? Is it something different? Is there something new that you want to talk about that's not there in mindfulness?
Yeah. No, there's a straight line. And what I'm talking about, the kinds of experiences I'm talking about here, people might get tastes of, even on an 8-week mindfulness course. And I've had people with whom I've had conversations, as it were, outside of the group, talking about really interesting experiences that have shown up for them. But yes, so there's a straight line when you come to cultivate meta-awareness and compassion, a greater sensitivity to your environment, a sensitivity to other people, other events in the environment, things, nature, and so on, then that's a natural outcome of simple mindfulness training. I'm only saying here that we can take it very, very much further. It needn't stay at the level that it ends up with when people complete, say, an 8-week mindfulness course. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a downside to the popularity of mindfulness in contemporary culture. And that is that people have come to rely more and more on apps and are doing much fewer, teacher-led structured courses of training. Now, the downside of that is that what I'm hearing more and more of is, I tried it and it didn't work for me. I tried it and it didn't work for me. And what I'm presuming is going on with many of the people who say that is that they've come to the process with a presumption about what the app is going to deliver for them. It's going to help them to quieten their minds, get rid of their thoughts. And that presupposition of that's what this is all about, of course people aren't going to get that when they first engage with instruction on an app. It's not available. What people might learn in a teacher-led process is how to allow that, let it be, pay attention to what is happening in your mind differently. Much harder to communicate in a short 5-minute guided meditation on an app with any conviction. And even when people hear that instruction, very often they discount it. They think it's just mindfulness burble. They don't realize that it's actually essential, that this is the process. Because there's such a strong presupposition that it's all about getting rid of your thoughts, quietening your mind, stopping thinking, and all of that stuff.
So that's what you're calling mindfulness burble, that people think actually you should be able to clear your mind, and that's success. Something like that?
No, what I'm thinking of as mindfulness burble is the instruction, look, you may find that your mind is full of thoughts, simply allow them, let them be. Don't get into a fight with your thoughts, but return your attention to the breath. Oh yeah, that's just stuff they say. What I need to be able to do is stop these thoughts. That's what I'm here for.
Yes.
That's why I bought this subscription. They talk this way, but that's just how they talk.
Yeah.
I think that some of that goes on.
Yeah. But actually you mean it.
You really mean it. And it's hard to mean it enough.
Yeah.
That fight is a fight where you inevitably lose.
Yes. Yes.
Because one of you loses.
Yes.
You know, the thinking mind or the intention to stop thinking, one of you loses.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the place of the teacher-led process, was that your term?
Yeah.
How important is that for, in a way, firstly for the process of mindfulness, but also for this deeper level of awakening or insight dimension?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question. I don't know. I guess, from everything I've just said, you presume the logical outcome would be, I'd say that some kind of teacher-led process is needed for the deeper level, for sure. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. And for those people who have made some headway with mindfulness, maybe they can keep going. So let's see. Let's see. Look, there's a conversation starting in the culture.
Yeah.
And I have a profound allergy to the creation of anything remotely resembling a cult. So I'm very allergic to anything that may end up being, I'm the teacher, you're the community, you're the followers, the disciples, the students, however I want to frame it. I know what's going on. I am going to suggest ways that you need to go about running your life or doing your practice, and you will benefit from my wisdom. I'm much, much more interested in a community of practitioners engaging in a conversation together, in helping to provoke and to enable some of these conversations to take place. And that may be conversations with teachers, if people want to think of themselves in those terms, or it may be conversations amongst each other, or any combination of the above. And explorations of what works for you. What works for you? I mean, I feel I have found my way to what works for me. I feel quite settled with that for now. I found what works for me. And it involves nature, and it involves art, and it involves meditation, it involves reflection, contemplation, ethical practice, and so on and so on and so on. So there's a whole package that works for me. Everyone must find out what their package contains. And the only way to find out is to follow your heart, engage with practices, and talk. Talk about what you find with people who may have something to bring to the party.
It seems to me that in this kind of discussion of a fairly large number of people who've engaged with mindfulness, and many people of great personal qualities, so they can really do it.
Yeah.
Despite busy business lives or family lives or really remarkable people. And then this discussion of that maybe going deeper into a dimension of awakening. It strikes me that as a modern Western, not just Western, but as a modern world exploration, we're in a different position to have that conversation than anybody has ever been before.
That is interesting. I mean, we have technologies for that conversation, which have never been available before. And we have there are upsides and downsides, but we have our, as it were, liberal democratic social fabric, which this stuff has not encountered before.
That's right.
It's previously been taught and spoken of within highly hierarchical contexts, initially feudal contexts, but however the society has been organized, they've generally been highly hierarchical. And there's a downside to that, which is that you then create contexts where the teacher sits at the top of a hierarchy, and then even in some places you get sub-hierarchies of attainment, as it were, beneath that. And certainly you get people who are thought to be wiser, slightly sort of less attained, blah, blah. I mean, for me, a very unhelpful way of thinking in today's world. Much more interested in a flat, much flatter structure for transmitting this information. And I think conversation is a lovely way of framing it. So I really don't want to think of myself in this way as a teacher.
Yeah.
But I'm really, really interested in the conversation. And I do have things that I'd like to inject into the conversation. I'd love people to engage with and think about, take seriously and respond to. And if, that can happen, I'd be absolutely delighted.
Are there any, you're just talking about what you'd like to bring into the conversation. Are there any kind of top things that come into your mind that maybe they're even already being spoken about a little bit but need more attention? Or where's the area of greatest potential, let's say, put it like that?
That's interesting. I think at the moment, the conversation that I'm hearing is very brain-based and psychologically based. And that's great and very valuable, and there's a language there that is really helpful and that can be used even for those of us who are not neuroscientists and haven't done nth degree studies in psychology. We can begin to use some of those ideas and concepts, work with them in our own lives and in our discourse, in the way we talk. So there's the relationship between awakening experiences and artistic appreciation, for want of a better word, or simply the feelings and the awe that is evoked by great works of art, many different forms of art. More than that, I'm also interested in what I've come to term, for the time being, the naturalistic imagination. This is a form of imagination that I think scientists use when they're trying to form a view of what, for example, has gone before us. So if you're talking about the world of the dinosaurs, or the world before the dinosaurs, or the world immediately after the dinosaurs, there's very, very little data. And what scientists have to do is they grapple with that data, try to make sense of it, try to analyze it. They use chemical analyses, they look at the fossil record, a whole bunch of very sophisticated analyses, and then they have to form a picture. And the picture that's formed is formed in the imagination. So that's an instance of what I mean by the naturalistic imagination, that faculty for approaching what is, as it were, and then making an image, taking a view, making an image. And that's something that we do all the time. As I've said before, right now, I'm imagining the back of the room, the idea that I'm sitting in a square room when I can't see all four corners, that's imagined. And we're always imagining. Right now, I'm imagining parts of my body which I'm not sensing. So we're always imagining. But there's a form of imagination that is vitally important in my approach, my personal approach to awakening. And that form of imagination is to come to an imagined sense of the web of life that we participate in and are constantly participating in. The dance of conditions, the sea of conditions, the web of life, however you want to understand it. That is a source of awe and wonder, and in a certain sense, self-transcendence. Because within the web of life, when you're trying to grasp the extraordinary nature of what it is that we're a part of, one's self-concern and me, mine, this, here, this important process going on, this overwhelmingly important process going, it begins to soften, And the experience of awe that one might get looking at a tree or a flower or contemplating, some of the herds on the Serengeti, or noticing the way, goats' eyes are shaped when you're sitting with looking at a bunch of goats in a field, or however, wherever you look, there is wonder. There is wonder. And whatever you hear about the natural world can be a source of wonder. So when one is engaged in that, with that sense of wonder, one is much less self-referential. And it's not calling on one to actually form a kind of hierarchy of gods, goddesses, other figures in one's imagination, or call them to mind or do anything. It's just wonder is right here, right now. Always. And this process that is going on here in this tiny corner of the web of life is really not all that important in that perspective, from that perspective. But also it gives us a way of conceiving a world in the end where selves as such, egos, fixed ego identities as it were, just aren't needed. That just doesn't have to be a part of the picture. There's a way of forming the picture, framing the picture of a web of life, a sea of conditions going on, that enables one to have a sense, yes, of being a locus of sensing and having memories and experiences, but all of that happening within a sea of conditions and not necessarily describing a fixed, irreducible selfhood.
There's a question that arises for me in relation to this, which is about the world as it is that we live in today and the kind of climate crises that seem to be looming.
Yeah.
So my question, I have to find out what it is, but I can imagine for myself, my own concern, and many people that I know have a kind of feeling of horrified anxiety and panic about what we think is coming, what we think we know is coming.
Yes.
So I'm wondering about the path to awakening, what that says for the world, what we do, but also how we manage our responses.
Yes. Well, we do what we can. Yeah. We're on a track towards another mass extinction. And we, humans, may be a part of that mass extinction. And yeah, there's a view, which I've heard repeatedly actually, is that, look, yes, mass extinctions happen, Humans may be wiped out. That's what goes on. That's how it all works. That may be true, but what it doesn't take into account is the immense suffering that attends such events. Immense suffering. And what we can do, we must do what we can to mitigate that. And some of that is changing our behavior. If we can burn less fossil fuel, that would be wonderful. I don't know whether to be optimistic or pessimistic in that regard. But another thing that we can do to help deal with the suffering is to help people to work differently with their minds and mental states, so that that can help to mitigate some of what is on its way, but also help people to be more responsible and thoughtful, other regarding in their behavior. Do we really want to have another mass extinction on our conscience? I don't. So we do what we can. Now, there's a big question about, does that mean you get involved in some of the Just Stop Oil protests in the UK, or Extinction Rebellion, as it's called in the UK, or some of the other mass movements, some of the large-scale movements? That's down to the individual to decide. And for people who are engaged in that work, mindfulness practices and an understanding of awakening may be very, very valuable. So I don't think there's an either-or here. I don't think you either go ahead and throw all your energy into trying to avert the crisis, or turn away from the crisis and put all your energy into spiritual practice. I think we have to do both. I think we have to actually attend to both, and certainly hold both within the space of awareness, with sympathy and understanding. Yeah.
And specifically with this response that I sometimes feel, and I know other people do, of panic, maybe you've already answered it, but I just wonder, is there something that this perspective has to say in the moment about that? There's this overwhelming concern and we're not doing what we need to do about it. And the distress rises.
Yeah, and it's terrible because, there's also the possibility of becoming cynical and defeatist. And none of these help. Cynicism doesn't help. Defeatism doesn't help. Panic doesn't help. I don't think humanity has faced anything like this before. And I think we find it very, very hard to imagine. And, every year, the news gets worse. Every year, the news coming out of, from climate scientists and from others gets worse. And all the time, hovering on the edge are populist politicians ready to cash in on any move to encourage people to change their behavior, or using taxation to encourage people to change their behavior, or using legislation to get people to change their behavior. And it's almost like one's watching a group of vultures just waiting their opportunity to use those occasions as an opportunity to grab some power and influence. So we're caught in a very strange position. But that's where we are. That's where we are. And within that, one does what one can.
I'm just recalling some of the earlier conversations we had in one of the videos about, once you have a choice to attend to what you want to attend to, you don't necessarily have to scroll and scroll. You can actually step out of that and become...
That's important. That's really important. When you get that choice, then you can come away from some of the doom scrolling.
Yes.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm not saying we just bury our head in the sand, but doom scrolling does nothing except, substantially lower your mood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And produce unresourceful states of mind.
Yeah. I'm hearing, in a way, quite a lot of empathy and compassion for the plight of somebody who's very concerned with the planet but struggling.
Yeah, I mean, in the face of mass extinction, that's a tough thing to say. It'll be okay. A mass extinction won't be okay. It's not okay. And it may or may not come. And it may or may not come, who knows when. And it's not okay. But meanwhile, here we are. Meanwhile, right now, here we are, with this life. This life. There are people right now in the Middle East facing unimaginable horror. And there's been a pogrom perpetrated in Israel, which has sent ripples of horror through people and unimaginable terror for the people involved in it. There is going to be a wave of destruction unleashed in Gaza, which is going to be appalling for the innocent people caught up in it. There are innocent people on all sides in this who are suffering the intransigence of those who won't talk to each other, who won't make space for each other in this world. And I can't say to somebody going through that horror, it's going to be okay, it's okay, just be with it. I mean, there comes a point where actually you can't hear that message. And it's not meaningful to communicate it. And there one has simply to step back with as much compassion and kindness as one can and wait for the opportune moment. We can only talk about the stuff we're talking about in the kinds of conditions that enable that conversation.
Yeah.
And there are conditions that just don't enable it. And in the face of the horrified anxiety that attends some concern about, an awareness of the prospect of mass extinction, it's tricky to have this conversation. And in the face of the immense suffering right now in the Middle East, you can't have this conversation. But there are fertile places for this conversation, and there are fertile places where we can draw people's attention to modes of experiencing that they can engage in right now that will make those kinds of events less likely. So the more people are paying attention to their own awakening and the awakening of others, the more people are doing that, the less likely we are to have these crazinesses unleashed upon us and upon others. So there's a value right now for those of us who have the privilege of being able to engage in these processes because we're able to. And let's not waste these circumstances. Let's not just throw this time away. It's a time in which we can practice. It's a time in which we can take in some ideas. It's a time in which we can hear some things that can change us and begin to change the culture and change the world around us, if enough of us do it. So these are fertile circumstances. We need to use them because there are plenty of unfertile circumstances all around us.